Picture stepping into a packed train where every passenger carries a faint film of grease on their skin. Their breath is sour. Their hands have touched doorknobs, coins, raw meat, sick children, and animal waste, and none of those hands have ever been properly washed. The metal pole is slick with old sweat. The seats hold weeks of dried skin. The air tastes like a closed mouth. This is not a horror film. This is simply daily life in a world where soap was never invented. Grease coats faces. Infected cuts ooze under sleeves. Lice move quietly between collars. A cough lands on a shared cup, and within hours an entire neighborhood is sick. For most of human history, people lived inside this exact reality without understanding why they kept dying. Germs were invisible. Disease felt like fate. Babylonians were producing primitive soap-like materials from fats and ash around 2800 BCE. Yet humanity stumbled through thousands more years, convinced that bad smells, bad spirits, or bad luck were the true enemies. Cleanliness is not natural, it is engineered. And somewhere in our past, surgeons once cut into living patients without ever washing the blood from their hands. Imagine waking before sunrise inside a small mud-walled home, where 6 people share 2 sleeping mats and 1 heavy fur blanket that has not been cleaned in years. You walk outside, step over waste from the previous evening, and drink from a clay pot of water collected from the same stream where your neighbors bathe, butcher animals, and rinse soiled cloth. This was not poverty. This was civilization. For most of human history, survival meant calories, warmth, and protection. Cleanliness was a luxury nobody had the energy to imagine. Prehistoric humans slept in shared furs crawling with parasites, drank from stagnant pools, ate with unwashed hands, and treated wounds with mud, leaves, or nothing at all. When villages grew into settlements, the problem multiplied. Concentrated populations produced concentrated waste. Wells sat downhill from latrines. Flies traveled between corpses and kitchens. Ancient Roman bath complexes could host thousands of people daily, despite contaminated shared water systems, turning relaxation into mass exposure. The Romans built engineering marvels, yet they had no concept of germ theory. They blamed illness on bad air, divine punishment, or imbalanced humors. Across cultures, sickness was almost always interpreted as a curse, a smell, or a moral failure, never as the work of microscopic organisms. Public baths spread skin infections. Midwives delivered babies with the same hands they used to handle the dead. Cooks prepared meat on surfaces still wet from yesterday. Burials in shallow graves leaked into nearby water supplies. The bodies of plague victims were sometimes carted past open markets. Imagine modern airports or subway stations, but multiplied across centuries, with no cleaning crews, no antibacterial wipes, and no understanding of why people kept collapsing. Humans psychologically normalized danger because everyone shared it. If your entire village smelled like rot, rot was simply the smell of being alive. If half of your children died before age 5, grief became background noise rather than crisis. Disease prevention as a concept barely existed. People treated symptoms, not causes. And as cities grew larger and trade routes stretched longer, humanity unknowingly built the perfect amplifier for a war it could not yet see. The Black Death killed an estimated 30 to 50% of Europe's population during the 14th century. And the people living through it had no idea what was actually killing them. They saw the symptoms, they counted the bodies, they burned the houses. But the true enemy was smaller than a grain of dust, hiding inside fleas, inside rats, inside the folds of traders' cloaks, inside the breath of a dying neighbor. For most of human history, the predator was invisible, and the predator was winning. Every great civilization eventually collided with the same biological reality. Bacteria multiplied in warm bodies. Parasites traveled in food and water. Viruses jumped from animals into humans through close contact, butchering, and shared living spaces. As soon as humans built cities, they built microbial ecosystems. As soon as humans built trade routes, they built superhighways for infection. A merchant could leave one port healthy, arrive at another carrying a disease that would erase entire populations, and never know he was the weapon. Plague outbreaks moved through ships, markets, wells, and armies with terrifying speed. Infected water repeatedly killed entire communities in a matter of weeks. Cholera could empty a town faster than fire. Typhoid quietly destroyed armies before they reached the battlefield. Battlefield wounds, even minor ones, became death sentences once infection took hold. Soldiers who survived the sword often died from the splinter. Childbirth, the most natural event in human life, became one of the deadliest. Mothers died from fever spread by the unwashed hands of the people meant to save them. Doctors moved between patients carrying invisible cargo. They examined corpses, then delivered babies, then treated the wounded, never suspecting that they themselves were the transmission system. Mortality rates remained terrifyingly high for centuries because microbes evolved faster than human societies could adapt. Bacteria reproduced in hours. Empires took generations to react. Humans were the prey animal in a relationship they did not even know existed. Epidemics reshaped economies, governments, and religious beliefs. Labor shortages after plagues collapsed feudal systems. Entire industries vanished. Faith leaders rose and fell based on whether their prayers seemed to slow the dying. Trade networks that brought silk and spice also brought smallpox, measles, and tuberculosis across continents. Many ancient cities permanently smelled of sewage and decay because waste removal was inconsistent and water was reused far past safety. Population growth would surge during peaceful decades, then crash violently when the next wave arrived. Empires that looked invincible on a map could lose a third of their citizens in a single summer. Invisible organisms quietly controlled human history more than kings, generals, or philosophers ever did. Soap, in this context, was one of the earliest practical defenses humans accidentally stumbled into, even though no one yet understood why scrubbing with fat and ash actually worked. Cleaning helped, but the reasoning was wrong. Ordinary touch remained one of history's deadliest technologies. And humanity kept losing the same war, century after century, because it could not see the enemy. Many educated Europeans during the medieval period genuinely believed that bathing was dangerous because warm water opened the pores and allowed disease to enter the body. This was not whispered superstition. This was mainstream medical advice. Wealthy nobles avoided full bathing for months at a time, masking the consequences with thick perfumes, powdered wigs, and heavily scented clothing. Cleanliness was not just neglected, it was actively feared. Across centuries and cultures, humans built elaborate reasons to resist the very habits that could have saved them. Some societies considered frequent bathing a sign of vanity or weakness. Others wrapped it in religious suspicion, treating concern for the body as a distraction from concern for the soul. Many wealthy households washed their clothes far more often than their skin, believing fresh linen alone was enough to absorb impurity. Doctors trained at the finest institutions resisted the simple act of washing their hands between patients, insisting that a gentleman's hands could not possibly be unclean. Ignaz Semmelweis demonstrated in the 1840s that handwashing dramatically reduced maternal mortality in childbirth wards, and the medical community responded by mocking him, dismissing him, and eventually driving him out of his profession. He died in an asylum while mothers continued to die from infections he had already proven were preventable. The pattern repeats throughout history. Humans struggle to fear what they cannot see. Threats that smell bad feel dangerous. Threats that look invisible feel imaginary. Hospitals across Europe quietly became infection factories, places where the sick went to get sicker because tradition outranked evidence. Social status mattered more than sanitation. A noble's bedroom could be filthy and still be considered cleaner than a peasant's washed floor, simply because of who slept there. People trusted smell more than science, hierarchy more than data, and comfort more than discomforting truth. Millions died not from a lack of intelligence, but from the simple cognitive bias that says, if everyone has always done it this way, it must be safe. Humanity stood directly at the edge of understanding disease, and for a long, painful stretch of history, almost chose to look away. Picture a subway pole during morning rush hour. Now picture that pole in a world where soap was never invented. Thousands of hands grip it every day, hands that prepared raw food, changed diapers, treated wounds, coughed into palms, and shook other unwashed hands moments earlier. The pole is no longer a piece of metal. It is a biological weapon being passed quietly between strangers. Now extend that scene across every surface in modern civilization. Touchscreens, hospital rails, elevator buttons, restaurant menus, door handles, steering wheels. Without soap, every one of them becomes a small engine of infection. In this timeline, hospitals are the most dangerous buildings on Earth. Surgeons move between patients with hands still warm from the previous body. Wounds that should heal in days fester for weeks. Routine births become coin flips. Childhood diseases that modern parents barely think about become annual calls of entire neighborhoods. The CDC reports proper hand hygiene significantly reduces diarrheal and respiratory disease transmission worldwide, and removing that single intervention rewrites the entire shape of human population. Restaurants in this world are quiet catastrophes. Cooks handle meat and produce with the same hands they used to take payment, scratch their faces, and wipe their mouths. Schools become outbreak engines, with children sharing pencils, snacks, and respiratory droplets in tightly packed classrooms for hours every day. Offices and factories become invisible incubators where one sick employee can disable a workforce within a week. Public transportation functions as transmission infrastructure rather than mobility infrastructure. Pandemics emerge faster, spread farther, and recur more often. Life expectancy collapses backward by decades. Infant mortality remains catastrophically high, the way it was for most of human history, where losing children was not a tragedy but a statistic. Repeated epidemics gut economies before they can stabilize. Governments struggle to maintain order under constant outbreaks. Armies lose more soldiers to dysentery than to combat. Modern medicine, even with antibiotics and advanced surgery, cannot compensate for a hygiene vacuum, and antibiotic overuse accelerates resistant bacteria far faster than science can respond. Global trade becomes biologically dangerous. Tourism and aviation supercharge outbreaks instead of spreading culture. Healthcare workers, instead of saving lives, become the most efficient vectors of disease ever created. Dense cities of 10 or 20 million people may never have existed at all, because biology would have collapsed them long before urban planning could. Civilization in this timeline does not end in a single dramatic event. It simply never grows past a permanent low-grade collapse. Billions of people alive today, you, your family, the strangers around you, would statistically never have survived childhood in such a world. Every gathering becomes a calculated risk. Every handshake carries a quiet possibility of death. Every embrace, every kiss, every shared meal becomes an act of biological gambling. Now zoom back in. Two strangers meet on a street corner. They shake hands. In our timeline, the moment passes without thought. In the soapless timeline, that single handshake might be the moment one of them stops being alive. A soap molecule has two ends, one that loves water and one that loves oil, and that simple asymmetry is the reason you are alive. When soap meets a film of grease, dirt, or microbial membrane, it surrounds the unwanted material, lifts it from the skin, and carries it away in the rinse. Many bacteria and viruses are wrapped in fatty outer layers, and soap dismantles those layers like a key turning in a lock. It does not kill in the dramatic sense. It disassembles. Quietly, chemically, reliably. This unremarkable molecule did something remarkable. It increased survival rates across entire societies. It extended life expectancy by years, then decades. It allowed cities to grow without permanently sickening their own residents. It made hospitals into places of healing instead of places of dying. Joseph Lister introduced antiseptic surgical methods during the 1860s using germ theory principles, transforming surgery from a near-death sentence into a survivable medical procedure. Suddenly, the same surgeons who once operated with bloody hands began scrubbing, sterilizing, and saving lives at rates that would have seemed miraculous a generation earlier. Hygiene, paired with sewage systems, clean water infrastructure, and eventually vaccines, became the quiet foundation of industrial civilization. None of these inventions look impressive. None of them generate dramatic footage. A bar of soap, a sewer pipe, a water filter, a small glass vial. The most world-changing technologies in human history are often visually boring because their job is to prevent disasters rather than create spectacles. Modern humans rarely notice the systems protecting them every day. Civilization is not maintained mostly by heroes or geniuses. It is maintained by prevention, repeated quietly, billions of times, in millions of homes. Look at the sink in your bathroom. That small object is one of the reasons your species still exists. Most of the things keeping you alive are things you never think about. Clean water arrives in your home through pipes you cannot see, treated by people you will never meet, protected by laws written before you were born. Sewage leaves your home the same way. Refrigeration preserves your food. Antibiotics rescue you from infections that would have killed your great-grandparents. Soap rests beside your sink, quietly waiting. Civilization is not a monument, it is a habit. WHO and UNICEF estimates show billions of people still lack reliable hand-washing access globally, which means the protection most of us take for granted is not actually universal. It is a privilege held together by infrastructure, education, and daily repetition. Neglect any one of those layers long enough, and centuries of progress can quietly reverse. Extinction rarely arrives as a single dramatic event. It arrives as a slow erosion of small protections, a forgotten habit, a broken pipe, an unwashed hand, a closed clinic. The thing that saved humanity was never one invention or one hero. It was the patient accumulation of invisible discoveries, repeated every day by ordinary people who barely notice they are doing them. Survival in the end may depend less on genius and more on maintenance. Wash your hands.